Check. Hello. Excellent. Do you have the Zoom chat pulled up? Awesome. My first panel, I made the mistake of not checking it soon enough and we missed a question or two. So, folks online, can you hear us? Can hear us. Hey, there we go. And now we're recording again. All right, we got a few more people coming in. That's awesome. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started first with some introductions. This is Esports at Public and Private Institutions. My name is Michael Jones. I'm the head coach of the varsity esports program at Drury University in Springfield, Missouri. I'm also honored to be serving as the co-chair, or rather the chair-elect of your board of directors. Drury is a NCAA Division II institution and a small private school with an enrollment of about 1,500 plus or minus, good chunk of those being student athletes.
My name is Travis Yang. I'm currently the director of esports at Wichita State, which is a D1 institution. I also served at, for the past 2 years at Texas A&M San Antonio, which was, they had just joined the NAIA. And prior to that, I was at Ashton University, which was also a D2 kind of smaller private.
The perennial competitor of Drury's in women's basketball. So I have now multiple things to be jealous of Travis. I feel like a Star-Lord or something. It's like, no, you're not. Feign your really deep voice for the rest of this panel. I don't think I can quite do it justice.
And I'm Caitlin. I've seen several of you at some of the other panels. I'm the director of esports at Michigan Technological University in Houghton, Michigan. We are a D2 school. We have a D1 hockey team just because we're that cool. And we have about 7,400 students-ish, between 7,000 and 7,500-ish. Our goal is to have 10,000 within the next couple of years. I know that's in our strategic plan. But yeah, so we are a public institution.
And I just wanted to double check again with Zoom. Can you hear, did you hear Caitlin just there? Because I was told that if we can't be heard in the room, we might not be heard online. And I don't know if this mic is just a lot louder. I think it does sound like it's on. So I just
Yeah,
want to
it's
make
fine.
sure that the folks online can hear all of us. How do I do that? I don't know. Oh,
Treated as two.
yeah, I don't know how to bring it back up. Yeah, I just want to see the chat also so we don't miss any questions. Yes, we can hear y'all. We can hear you. Excellent. Cool, cool, cool. Cool. Now we can, there we go. We just have it like that and we can bounce back and forth so we can go check the questions. Awesome. We'll make sure after every slide or two to double check on our remote attendees to make sure you're being heard. So we can hear everybody. Excellent. Well, let's get underway then. So our slides here have a couple questions to serve as prompts. We'll each kind of give our thoughts, and I want to make sure that we reserve plenty of time for questions. And honestly, if you have a question that comes up organically in response to something we say, just raise your hand and we'll run the mic out to you. But make sure that any questions you do have, you wait until we get you the mic. Otherwise, the folks online won't be able to hear you. All right. So what kind of institution are you? We've answered this in our introductions. We have a good mix of public and private. How did our programs start? Be skeptical about startup information you hear. Interesting. How did our program start? Who wants to kick that off?
Kick that off. It started about us as members of the club team. So myself as president and my vice president being very salty that IT would not give us the email esports@mtu.edu when we don't have a varsity program. So we were, very nicely fighting with IT about, we don't want esports club. We don't want esports club at Michigan Tech, whatever. And then finally, one of my bosses, who was the senior associate athletic director, got looped into the conversation, said, we need to sit down. And I said, oh boy. I was very tunnel visioned at the time. I didn't see the bigger picture. And we sat down with the athletic director and the senior associate athletic director, and they said, we've been looking at esports for 3 years, but we don't have student initiative. So we didn't do it. And this was our chance as the club team. So myself and my VP basically made a presentation talking about where esports fit in the mission and vision statement of Michigan Technological University, why esports was essentially a very futuristic sport. It's always changing, it's adaptable, it's challenging, it's fun, it's international. It has all of these components that we have and we focus on at Michigan Tech. And that's kind of our new slogan, is Michigan Tech is tomorrow, or it's some cheesy slogan. To be honest, I'm sick of seeing it on campus, but point is we showed them some sister schools and said, here are their programs. Here's how many players they have. Here's what they compete in. Here's some estimated costs. Here are the benefits. It could be jobs. It could be leadership opportunities, volunteer opportunities, all these things. And they said, great. And we made a survey. I designed it to specifically try to understand from our student body, what do you know about esports? What are your current esports related behaviors? I.e., do you watch Twitch? Do you have a favorite team or streamer? And then the third one, which was, how likely would you be to support our esports program if we had one, whether that's financially, attending games, whatever. And so we received mostly positive, not extremely positive, but it was basically neutral to positive results. And so that was enough student initiative for them to say, let's do it. They put out the posting for the director hiring, and I think she just pulled a name out of a hat and said, oh, wow, here we are. And then no, I'm just kidding. So that's how I'm in my position. So again, the key point to take away from that is my university did not make a decision without student initiative. And that says to me, as at the time, a future employer, that they do not want to make decisions just for themselves, for their departments. They want to make it on behalf of representing the students. So that was a major thing for me. And that is how I developed the organizational structure and the culture that we have in the Michigan Tech program. So.
That's awesome. And I kind of plowed through that first question, which I realize now is directed at you, not us, because we already told you that. So I want to do a quick poll of the room real quick here. How many folks here in the audience and out online in Zoom land, how many of you are at a private institution? Show of hands. Good chunk of the room. I'd say at least 50%, maybe a little more, depending on how many of you are from the same school. How about a public institution? How many of you represent a public institution? I see 2, 3 maybe, or someone's just resting their hand on there. Okay, cool. 3, 4. So we got a few there in the back as well. And then we have other up there. So any others in the room, any for-profit institutions, or I guess technical colleges, or things that don't fall within the kind of dynamic of public or private? Okay, cool. Didn't think so. Online, have a good mixture of public, private. Cool. And I think that's pretty par for the course. So I thank Caitlin for sharing her perspective. Mine is very different. And I think I have a bit of luck and privilege in how I came to my role. Prior to starting up the program at Drury, I was the head coach of the esports program at Culver Stockton College up in Canton, Missouri. And in both of those instances, the university had already made the decision to add esports. And I think many of you may be in a similar boat. So very lucky in that I didn't have to go through that arduous process of, getting a bunch of voices together and kind of demanding from the administration that, hey, this is something valuable that your students want. That decision had already been made. I think the downside there was I then had to come in and help readjust some of the expectations, because as many of you know, particularly with smaller private schools, they add an esports program for many different reasons, but it generally falls back to boosting enrollment, and rightfully so. Working in higher ed, I'm sure we've all heard of the approaching enrollment cliff. We are no longer the newest sport on our campus at Drury. We've since added 5 new club sports. We have men's and women's rugby, men's and women's lacrosse, a hockey team, all in the hopes of boosting our enrollment. Now, I'm very lucky in my institution in that is not the sort of only metric by which our success is measured, but it is the major one. It's not that, my boss, the athletic director, doesn't also want our students to have an excellent experience. She wants us to win. There's a lot of other stakeholders involved in things they want, but at the end of the day, what justifies our continued existence and our growth and the ability for me to get a pay raise, me to bring on an assistant, me to make that assistant full-time, me to give more scholarships, to get more space, to go to more live events, all of those things is centered around that recruitment goal. And so I imagine we'll come back to that question throughout this panel. And I'm curious for some of your experiences on that, because I think that's one of the major challenges facing a private institution is finding a balance between those two sort of extremes of, we just need as many students as possible. And maybe it's to our benefit to not just focus on that and have a little bit of a curve in that growth. Because I think as many of you are aware, we've seen a lot of schools that have jumped in with both feet and grown a little too quickly. And that is also a problem and a potential challenge for private institutions. But for us, our university's quite small. Like I said, we're about 1,500 undergrads total. And a lot of the I'd say groundwork in getting the program started went back to, like I said, trying to challenge some of those expectations of what esports is and what its role on campus would be. And then just getting in front of the various departments, because once again, working in higher ed, I'm sure all of you know that many of these departments on a campus can be quite siloed. It's not always the case, and some departments are different and work a little better with others. I've been very lucky that most of our departments are at least willing to hear me out and work with us, but that can be depending on the university and who's involved and the status of budgets, and everyone's kind of competing against each other to try and get as many resources as possible. That can be a little more contentious and involves a bit of politicking. And so maybe we'll talk about that at some point if you would find that relevant. Yeah, I'll pass it off here. And then before we go to the next slide, I after you kind of say your piece, I'd love to maybe poll the room again. And I saw this happen in an earlier panel this week. Just make sure there's not any like specific questions or things that you all want covered, because we'll pontificate for an hour and then, but I want to make sure that we're covering things relevant to y'all. So,
and I'll try to make mine quick. A lot of my experiences echo those of Caitlin and Mike. I started at Ashland University, again, D2 private under athletics. The objective from the get-go was recruitment driven. They made that very clear. And as Mike alluded to, right, a lot of your budget, your asks for scholarships, for your additional student employment, all of that stems from, well, okay, how are you recruiting, and how are you doing competitively? From there at Texas A&M San Antonio, for me, it was kind of a 180 turn, because at that institution, public institution, but it was also housed under campus rec there. So a complete flip in terms of objectives. And I went in kind of with my one track mind, which is like, okay, I'm here to recruit. I do this really well. That's what I'm here for. And my director at the time, Art Alage, and he's like, no, there's no numbers. You don't really got to worry about that. And I just could not process. I'm like, well, you want me to recruit like 10, 15, try to get 20? He's like, no, just do some tournaments and do some programming for the students, which was a huge flip. But I found that, you know, after a couple months to be a lot more enjoyable, a lot less stressful, and it allowed me to truly focus on that student experience, which I'm sure all of you try to do in your programs as well. And then finally here at Wichita State, I wasn't here for the start of this program. My assistant director was when he was an undergrad. So very similar to the experiences of Caitlin. He was a part of, I think he was actually the president of the gaming club, you know, back when, again, he was early in his undergrad, and he actually was a champion on campus to help get that club the recognition it needed from their campus rec department. And now it's actually housed within the College of Applied Studies, which is kind of unique in the higher ed space. The program is not housed within athletics. It's not housed under campus rec or student life. It's actually associated directly with an academic college. So already there, I think that'll lead into some nice segues about, you know, where you see programs housed and then how that affects what their priorities are.
So I guess quick polls of the room, because that brought up a very good point as well. How many programs do we have under athletics? Fair amount, 4 or 5. 2 of those hands are my program, so maybe only 3. How many under student life? Or like something in the student union, like not academic or athletics, but some student involvement, student engagement. You might have different names for it on your campus. What would the other one be? Academic. Who's under an academic department? I see a hand. Any not mentioned? Any other strains? What statewide and online programs? Cool. And then recreation. Okay, so it's campus rec. So is your program more focused then on like intramurals and on-campus programming, or is it a external varsity competition program, or both? Gotcha. Interesting. So he's saying this was, and repeating for the folks at home, he says this was their first year, or this will be their first year. And while they're under a more campus rec heading, they are kind of a varsity focus. So that just goes to show you that sort of where you're housed on campus kind of doesn't matter in terms of what it can vary much, but you can still have a varsity program or just be more internally student life focused, or a little bit of both, no matter what department you're under. Real quick, anyone want to share a question or a hope, something they want to get out of this? Oh, thank you. And if not, that's fine. If you're just here for kind of the general conversation and maybe you'll have a question later, that's okay. But is there any?
Think these 2 are really funny. That's totally.
Yeah, any specific questions or things you're hoping we'll cover, or things you want to know? Show of hands over there. All right.
Hi, I'm kind of wanting to learn more about how schools that operate under recruitment incentives work and what those kind of figures and numbers can look like.
Gotcha. So a little more in depth on recruitment numbers and specifics and how that operates. Any other questions? Any other hopes? Things you want to get out of this session? Things you want to know? There's no such thing as a dumb question.
Color's blue.
My favorite color is black.
Okay, well, that's cool.
Cool. Okay, so it seems like we're mostly we're here to join along. We'll cover a lot in here, and if you think of a question, like I said, feel free to raise your hand. We don't have to like wait until the end. So
I did want to make one point. We kind of talked about, again, all of our programs and how they started, and I kind of alluded to this, and I think both of them covered it as well. But there's a lot of information out there on how to start a program and what you need to do, and you need to be skeptical about this. If we've learned anything from the past year and or anything in the digital age, that people will literally say anything and anything that they want to get you to get their consulting or do whatever it is. And frankly, like, being a part of NACE has been super amazing. And especially, I'm going to shout out our Michigan group. We are very collaborative. We are very raw with each other on how much stuff costs. Like, we're not saying, okay, this is exactly like, you know, who it is and how much and all the stuff we spend, and this is the exact revenue we get. But if you want to know how much my desks are in my facility, I will tell you. If you want to know how much my computers are, I will tell you and what is in them. We are very raw with each other. but that takes trusting people and trusting people in this organization and this industry. But you need to find those people first. So I just really want to make that point of be skeptical about information that you hear, especially if you're going to a public or you're going to a private university, because that may not apply to you. So if you go in with those assumptions, you may be gravely disappointed.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. A quick piggyback on that. A common critique that has been levied at NACE in the past is that it's our fault that programs are underpaying or they have low budgets or small labs or something. And I'll give you some context. Years ago, 5-6 years ago when we started, there were maybe a handful of varsity programs, and they were lucky to have a full-time staff member. So in response to that climate, NACE's message was kind of like, hey, if you could pay them something, that would be better than what you're doing. And if you could have a lab with at least, 6 computers, that might be a good start. And that, I think, was interpreted as that is all you need to do. And that's a bare minimum starting point from 6 years ago. So we have updated those figures. We've updated those numbers. That is not how we're advising schools now. But there are plenty of other consultants out there and as well as we do
And keep in mind also that we have 12 computers in our lab. That's not a lot. I don't call it an arena. It's not an arena. It's a facility. So there's a lot of people that are like, well, if you don't have 20 computers, you're doing it wrong. What if we couldn't afford more than 6 and all we have is an office that was an old sport coach's office?
It's
Again,
okay to do what you
it
have.
differs, right? And so the point is you're doing something. So that's I just wanted to make sure that was so. We kind of talked about this, so and you kind of pulled the groups, but I guess starting with we'll have Travis go, but what did you see as some positives for being housed in those different areas?
Sure, and I'll try to leave athletics and some of these other areas open for y'all. And I alluded to it. I'll take the example of campus rec when I was at San Antonio. Again, really no focus on recruitment there. Funding was kind of set. It was student fee associated. So really my directive from my director was, we want programming. We want you to engage the student body. We want to do community outreach, engage with the high schoolers, build out varsity teams and compete and all that good stuff. But that's not the number one goal. Again, the number one goal was program, come up with unique ways to just engage the current student body, as well as reach out to the local community. And then just kind of in addition to that, just because right now we're housed within an academic college, which for some people is a very unique situation. It's unique to me. Coming into Wichita State, I did not have any experience running a program or creating a program in this environment. The one immediate thing that I've already noticed, just our proximity as a varsity program to all of these other academic departments, our education program, our human performance studies, we're literally in some cases right next to them in the building. So I can reach out to those faculty, they'll reach out to us if they want to do studies, if they want to test out certain things, if they want to utilize our space for some of their academic coursework, we're all gun-ho for that. And that's just an immediate thing that I noticed that I had not had experience before when it was under athletics or campus rec. That's been a nice positive.
Yeah, that's awesome. Quick question for us. Is one of the slides about specifically like scholarships and stuff like that? Because I know that was a question that came up, and if it is, I'll wait. But if it's not, I can wrap it into my answer here. I just don't want to like eat a whole slide. Cool. Perfect. Okay, cool. I'll kind of wrap that in then to address that gentleman's question. So we're under athletics at Drury. We're going into our 4th year this fall. Prior to that, I was at Culver Stockton, which was very unique in that it was under the IT department. I think especially with new programs, you'll find that you're in the department with the person who has the expertise to get it started, especially if you're not hiring someone from the outside. So it's totally okay if, for the first semester, your program is housed under the psychology department because one of your faculty members plays a ton of League of Legends and is like the only one right now on campus with the prerequisite knowledge to get it running. That's totally okay. And you can reorganize it from there. I personally have really enjoyed being under athletics at Drury, but I've spoken with a lot of my peers who are also under athletics and have seen some of the potential downsides of that as well. I think the main thing you should think about, especially if you're under athletics or considering having your program under athletics, is What is the level of support and understanding from those current administrators? So I've been very lucky that our athletic directors, even though they didn't get it at first, they wouldn't, spend their free time watching a game of League of Legends, was willing to kind of set their ego aside and go, okay, what is this? And treat me as the subject matter expert and go, okay, I don't get this, but I see that it's a competition. And the biggest piece of advice that I would give is understand the language, the jargon, the policies, the internal workings of how athletics works. Because I think one of the main downsides of being under athletics is an athletic department sort of just assuming that the rules they use for every other sport should be applied to you across the board, which many can and should, depending on the policies you have on campus. But you might have a full-time eligibility person who's really involved with the NCAA policies, and your athletic director says, well, they need to handle your eligibility stuff. And then you go, well, it's very different and complicated. And I actually served on the committee that wrote those rules. And they're like, no, it has to go through this person. So we've been very lucky that our administrators are helpful and there and present and answer questions and give us resources in the 50% of cases where what athletics does is relevant to what esports does. But in the other 50% where we're doing something completely different, they're willing to take a step back and give us the space we need to do that. So that would be my biggest piece of advice to you, is understand whatever your internal operational policies are, because many times at a college, like the way that they're doing it is just the way that it has been done. And they're kind of just running on the precedent. And so if you can have a well-educated opinion on, well, here's why we shouldn't follow that rule, because we have our own version of that rule within NACE or within something else. It's not enough to just say like, well, we're esports and we're different, so we shouldn't follow your rules. They don't know why we're different. You have to contextualize it for them. And so I spend a lot of time communicating in sports analogies and being like, well, imagine you're playing basketball, but every 2 weeks, the NBA decides to push back the three-point line because, you know what I mean? And they go, oh, I see why this is different and challenging. And yeah, maybe you're not having your athletes out there running and doing the same level of practice and coaching that we do, but you have to spend a lot of mental resources on keeping up with the patch changes and things. So it goes a long way to try and find analogies and ways to bridge that gap and share how what you're doing is definitely not the same as a traditional sport, but the same level of effort, maybe on different things. So that's been really helpful. On the scholarship side, everyone does it a little differently. I think we're pretty common for a nonprofit institution in that we do the tuition discount model. So rather than having a pool of money that we hand out until it is empty, we have sort of a range of scholarships that we can offer, and all of them together have to be around an average. And it's just, we're not charging the students that amount. So it's a bit semantics. It is a scholarship for them. It is less money that they have to pay to the university. It's just the source of where it comes from is a little different. Some universities like fundraise, and that money might go into like a 2-book account or something, or you get a donation from a private donor, and then you can use that on scholarships. For us, we can't. Our basketball team can, right? So it's learning your operational policies, learning how they're different per each sport, especially if you have a pretty clear divide between your NCAA sports and your non-NCAA or club sports. That's a good analogy as well, is like, hey, all these club sports have their own governing bodies and unique things. So do we. But I would say that's a pretty common scholarship model. It can be frustrating when I essentially get outbid by another institution, but we're also a smaller, like I said, smaller private school. We're looking for a very particular kind of student, and oftentimes the recruits we lose probably wouldn't have been the best fit for us anyway. And so we're kind of happy to sort of just stay in our lane in that regard. But yeah, ask around, and it might, especially if you're under athletics, it might not even be their policy at all, right? You might go to your athletic director and say, why can't I take money out of this budget and give it to this student? He needs a couple extra thousand. And if we get him, we're going to be great, I swear. And they'll go, we get it, but it's not our policies. It might be the policies of the quote unquote folks across the street, which is the dynamic we have sort of on campus between athletics and everybody else, the admins. And it's usually financial aid and admissions folks. So if you're just starting as a collegiate esports coach, the actual biggest piece of advice I would give you is bring some cookies or donuts to your financial aid staff on your first day. Meet all of the admissions counselors, ask them how they do their job, and ask them how you can help them do their job, rather than trying to bend them to your will and saying, well, I use this kind of form and I'll send it along to you so that you can contact them. No, ask them how they operate and stay on top of it, because in a single recruiting cycle, you might have 2 or 3 admissions counselors that work with that student, because those are generally entry-level jobs with a lot of turnover. So get in those doors, make friends with them, build those relationships. And I think that's true for sort of every department on campus, but particularly on the recruitment side, your admissions, your financial aid folks. If you're going to do intramurals, your student life, your student activities folks, et cetera, et cetera. Get out of your lab and make friends.
We are under athletics. The big reason for that was essentially the student involvement piece. Our athletes are very highly regarded on campus. They are also held to the highest expectation of anyone on our campus, behaviorally and academically. Our average GPA with our student athletes is 3.6 at a STEM school. So we're kind of goated. And we're also really good on the court and in the field. So that was a big kind of reason why. It also gives us a lot of opportunity to offer scholarships. A lot of schools don't offer scholarships and cannot offer scholarships, and that's really unfortunate. But they manage to recruit and have successful programs just the same. So that just means that we're very fortunate that we were able to do that. A little bit of a different model as opposed to the tuition reduction. We do give the more traditional range. It can be typically from what I would say a walk-on to 10,000, and that is a very specific scenario where you literally have to be a trifecta, basically awesome individual with good grades and good at the game and have a good personality to fit in with the program. So again, both of them kind of covered a lot of the major things, getting to know the people on campus, understanding really what your department, wherever you are under, wants. If that is butts and seats, that is butts and seats. You can do butts and seats well. You don't have to just say, okay, anybody and everybody. I'll take the bronze 5s. I'll take the iron 4s. What is the lowest rank in literally any other game? I'll take the first time Apex Legends downloader. Like, I got you, fam. Like, you're on the team. Like, that's cool. You can have standards, and you should have standards, because not everyone's going to be good in your program or good in the university or make it, because at the end of the day, what do you want? Graduation. When do we want it? And however long it takes them to do it, hopefully 4 to 6 years, right? We want our students to get in, get a good education, and leave better than they came. And so again, that bounces off of understanding, and we'll get into this a little bit later, of understanding where you're housed and what priorities they have. So for Suzanne, it is, we want good student athletes. We want them to be very academically oriented. We want them to represent our university appropriately and the mission and the values of the program, and we want them to succeed. When I told her we had a national championship, she was like, I want a plaque. I want a jersey. I want a ring. I want all this stuff in my office right next to our hockey championships. We are seen as just as valuable isn't the right word, but in the same light as our hockey team. Now, that doesn't mean other athletes see us that way. But that means that our athletic director, the one giving us the money and the budget and the funding, sees us that way. Other schools are not as fortunate. And so we'll talk again a little bit later about how to talk to your admins and what things you might need to tell them or data you may need to get to have a better conversation with them. Had it a little bit easy where our athletic director was like, yes, on board, great, we love it. You're the subject matter expert. We understand you're different. And that's, again, a really good point is we follow NCAA rules. We do 20 hours a week. They lift weights twice a week. They have study tables. They have GPA requirements within the department. They have front rush forms, eligibility forms they need to fill out for the department. And then I deal with the league eligibility forms, anything relating to, external stuff. And then that's just how that goes. Medical forms, they're expected to fill those out and turn those in. So understanding those policies and procedures and sitting down with my AD, who said to me the other day, I need to know if something is not applicable to you. And frankly, nothing really isn't. They lift weights, they need medical forms. They need eligibility forms. We need to know when they're going to graduate and if they have the GPA to be eligible within the department, right? So until that point comes, have that open discussion and say, here's kind of how things go. But again, translating that and making sure how you're communicating that is actually good. And if you're not a traditional sport person, that is totally fine. There are plenty of other analogies that you could probably use. And if you do need help, I'm sure all of us could probably give you some, but I was a collegiate athlete, so at a D2 school, so I was very familiar with that process in general. And there's plenty of us at this conference and in NACE that have those maybe the same experiences. So don't be afraid to ask if you're not sure how to articulate it. As far as funding goes, again, I'll just kind of alluded to this and we can kind of segue into the next point, but there are some people here that literally are not given any money. Straight up. They have $0 in their budget. I have an operating budget and I have a scholarship budget. And they're very separate. My scholarship budget goes to basically anyone I want to give a scholarship to. And I have a lot of money for that. A lot. Quotes. Could always have more. And what I was told was, what type of team are you budgeting for? I budgeted for 2 national champion contender teams, like that level, and the rest of them, I want them to be the same skill level as they were in the previous years, which is essentially above average, good or above average. So that's what I told my AD in terms of planning for scholarships in the future. That may look different based on your goals as to where you're housed. Same with funding. I have an operating budget. So there's a bunch of different things that could come out of that. And that budget comes from athletic revenue, university revenue, and then I think some of the student activities fee that we get because the students get in for free to our athletic events. So if you're not generating revenue for your department or your program and you're under athletics, you're probably not going to get a lot of money or get what you want. So start generating those revenue ideas, start gathering data, because my revenue generating event may look very different than your generating revenue event, especially if it's on campus. So in order to make those decisions and request that money and talk about that, you need to have data to support that. And to get data, you need to try something.
I'll just speak real quickly towards our funding here at Wichita State. Our funding for the esports program is kind of split between 3 different orgs. A good chunk of it comes from student affairs, from academic affairs, and another kind of third area, but just as important, is student fees. So prior to my hiring about 6 months ago, the program was funded entirely through student fees. And then every 2 or 3 years, you'd have to go and actually sit before the student committee and make your case, justify everything. With some of these other departments coming in, providing additional funding, that certainly helps, but I'll kind of present to you an issue that we had and kind of a solution that I'm in the process of trying. So we had additional funding come in, but then this year I had to go and sit back before that committee to make the case for why we wanted to keep that amount, but then also why we had this additional money coming in. And that's the student fee committee. It's students sitting on there. They didn't like that, to be honest. They have the fee amount that we are getting from student fees. Fortunately, again, with the other divisions coming and supporting, we made it work. But that presented a challenge. And so after talking with our provost, our VP of Student Affairs, and the dean of CAS, on one hand, they were frustrated because from their perspective, they knew the importance of that funding, but how do we relay that to the students? And so since that last fee hearing, and in preparation for the next one down the road, for me personally, we talk about the stats and keeping track of things. Every time we collaborate, we bring a high school over, we host an event, we do some type of engagement, some programming. I keep track of the date, which org it was with, how many people were affected, were involved, if it was a revenue generator, roughly how much was raised. Try to keep track of all of that data, so that next time when I go and sit back before those students, I'm not just kind of rambling and talking about esports, because we all can talk about that and positive. A lot of them want to see numbers. They want to see how many orgs did you work with, how many other institutions did you help. Some of them just want data. And again, I think that's what Caitlin alluded to, is your campus is going to be different. Some won't care at all. They just want you to go out there and win, and that's it, and that looks good. But some of them really do care about learning exactly what your program is doing.
Yeah, quickly on budget, we have a general operating budget that we get from the university, just like every other sport, that comes from the number of students we have. So basically, our students are portion of their tuition is forming our budget, as well as some money from the endowment and whatnot. That especially through the first couple of years, the university is technically like at a loss, even though they're not really spending that much in the grand scheme of things on our esports program compared to a traditional sport. But it's going to take 3 or 4 years to get to sort of your roster goal and a minimum that is like at least revenue neutral, right? So it's paying for itself, and then you have some room for growth there. So on that point, find out who knows the process and meet with them directly. Learn the processes of who to go talk to get what you need. It may be multiple different people on your campus. So that's where we get our funding. And then another benefit for us in being under athletics is that athletics does regular fundraisers already, where we tap into our alumni to try to get some additional funding. That's going to take us a little bit of extra time because we, don't have nearly as many alumni, but that's kind of a rough answer of like, hey, I need more money. How do I do it? It's like, keep your alumni engaged and then go ask them in 10 years when they have money. So that's not a super helpful thing right now. But that's something we're going to be focusing on moving forward, is we already have big established fundraisers that we're able to take part in. And then also just quickly going off of what Travis said there about keeping track of those numbers. I actually just finished my master's here at Drury in civic and nonprofit leadership. And one of the things I learned is something called the logic model, which I guess is pretty common among nonprofits. I'd never heard of this before. But chances are, public or private, your university is almost surely a nonprofit entity. And in the nonprofit space, especially trying to get grants and additional funding, it's all about data and showing how effective what you've done is. So I can't stress how important what Travis said was. Keep track of every little thing. We had a high school visit with 5 students on this day. All of that adds up, and look up a logic model. It's sort of a holistic kind of like, considering our mission, vision, values, and our goals, here are the things that we are going to do. And most importantly, the ways that we are going to measure it to ensure that what we did actually had its intended effect. And therefore we should have more money next year, please. So that's a really valuable tool, either in your collegiate teams or any other nonprofit enterprises you may end up working with.
And just to throw out real quickly, just because I know some of this is about securing, and I imagine a lot of you want to grow your budget. Kind of 2 ideas. Obviously, traditional athletics camps, esports camps. If you want to host those yourselves, partner up with athletics, partner up with rec, partner up with, there's some third-party organizers out there. I think Generation Esports just introduced their own model for camp partnerships as well. Definitely explore those. Camps are a huge revenue generator, as you can imagine. In terms of scholarships, real quick, just this is a model that we're in the process of trying, which I found to be pretty neat and may actually be pretty easy for y'all to try as well. Let's say we have 20 grand, for example, for scholarships. We can then go, as a base amount, and we go out to, say, the College of Engineering and say, hey, Dean from the College of Engineering, if you give us $5,000 in scholarship for esports, we will turn around and guarantee that $5,000 goes straight back to a student who is incoming, transferring to College of Engineering, or a current student College of Engineering. So it's a win-win, right? Then they can say they've got this unique partnership with esports, and we can use that to help us recruit, obviously, and help our current students. But then imagine, right, if you go to every department on campus, and even if you only get half of them, right, and it's $2,000 to $5,000 each, that's a substantial amount of money. Just a kind of a neat idea that, again, we're in the process of trying. We've done it so far with just our College of Applied Studies, and we've turned that 5,000 into a new GA position because the college was able to meet us halfway. And they're like, well, if you're setting aside 5,000 to help one of our students, we'll meet you halfway and turn him into a GA because she's coming back as a master's student. So just a neat potential idea for y'all out there.
That's an awesome idea, and I'm definitely stealing that. And I will definitely give you credit for that idea when it is very successful, because at least 3/4 of our players and our staff are engineering majors. So yay. So I did skip ahead a slide quick because we were talking briefly about stakeholders and champions. I love that term, and I don't remember which one of you 2 said it, but it was I love that term. I think it's super awesome. If you're in the middle of developing a program, or even if you have one and you're making decisions, whether that's restructuring your organization or expanding to different games, or even creating a facility or developing a facility, engage those champions the entire process. They love that stuff. They want to be involved very clearly, or you wouldn't consider them a champion. So involve them in the entire process. Maybe you don't have to be like, okay, so these chairs are, $364 each, okay, and here's our budget, right? Okay, what do you think about what vibe do we want in the facility, or what are our priorities, or what do you think recruitment perspective? Like, they don't need to be experts, and you don't even need to take their advice necessarily, but just engage them, and really do actually dig deep and think about your stakeholders. Like, who actually are the people that this is for? Yes, students are by far the largest and the ones, but they are not the only ones. If you only did things for your students in your program, are you ignoring the greater community who could continue to support your students? You have to think about who supports your primary stakeholders and how you need to engage with them in whatever way that is. If it's a local business and they have maybe their 5-year anniversaries there, maybe take the esports team there and say, hey, this is our favorite coffee shop. We love being here. Yo, like y'all should come down to this, right? Or maybe say, hey, we want to make this stream, this match about you. Like, tell us about your company or your business. Like, we want to show off local, initiatives or whatever. So identify those stakeholders within your university, but also external to your university. Any comments? Okay. So again, how do you talk to admins? And I think I would love to hear from the entire panel on this, but what do they value? So at tech, at TLDR, we're engineers, we're nerds, we're scientists, we like data. Data drives decisions. I convinced myself that I'm the one that made that quote up, but I think it was my dad, but I'm just going to say it was me. No, I'm just kidding. But data drives decisions. So Suzanne asks me all the time, what are the numbers? Give me the data. I need to know. And that's how she makes informed decisions. Exact numbers. She wants predictions that are based on actual numbers. I'm not going to throw numbers from other schools are okay, but they're not as convincing as if I manage to do something and I have the data for it. So consider again, what actually is valued. And typically that may come from your university's mission statement. So, or what type of university you might be.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent point. That is all very true. And if you have excellent admins, then that is the perfect route. It's like, here's what we're doing. Here's why I think it's valuable. Here's some data to show it. We would like more money, please. And they go, yes, that seems like a worthy investment. I'll give the maybe the more realistic, pragmatic perspective, depending on your individual institution. Admins are people. They all have their own needs and pressures from their bosses, all the way up to your college president who has to answer to a board of trustees or something similar. So the unfortunate reality at many schools is you kind of just have to learn the particular ropes of your institution, learn the particular political nuances. Finding a champion, I think, is super valuable, even if they don't ever publicly advocate for adding an esports program or anything for you, even if they're just like, I think this is cool. And let me give you a tip. You want to talk to so-and-so, right? Their boss is the actual decider, but they'll do kind of whatever their lieutenant advises them to do because they're busy with the brand new Capitol Project academic building. And if you go and try and knock on their door and say, hi, I'd like some more computers for our esports lab, please. They're like, don't have time, right? And that's not necessarily a like, oh, I don't care about you. I don't want to help these cool things that are happening at our university. It's just the reality of like, I have only so many hours in the day and my boss is really on me to get X done. So it's finding a champion, but it's also finding the right avenue. And sometimes it is just kind of getting in front of the right person and making an impassioned case. Other times it's being patient. It's finding kind of the back door in, as it were, finding the people who can move the needle, but maybe not now, maybe next budget cycle. That's an answer I often get, as sort of like, because I'm very quick on things. I have an idea and I want to like execute on it and make it a reality before my brain shifts to the next thing that I'm going to fixate on. And that is not how higher ed works generally. Things take time. Like if you want to add academic programming, that's going to be a year at least. There's probably a very clear procedure to go through on, giving information to the right faculty board, and then they review it, and then they go, okay, we'll vote on this in 3 months after we've had some time to think about it. And it's like, I wanted it done by spring. And it's like, no, not an option. So temper, all of us are going to leave this convention hopefully fired up and ready to like, I'm going to make esports happen on my campus. And then you're going to run into a closed door and lose some of that momentum. So just, keep that in the back of your mind. There's a realistic side to it as well. And that doesn't mean don't go and try and do all of these things. Get the data, try and get in front of the right people, but don't be disheartened when they kind of write you off or they say, great, I have some time to get you in on my schedule in a month. It's like, okay, find some other people, get the ball rolling, and worst case, do it with what little resources you have. because then you can say, hey, look at this amazing thing we did with our 6 computers and tiny lab. We had this awesome camp, and look at how many students came to campus. Then they can't help but give you that extra support if you're very open and public with your successes. So hope that wasn't too much of a bummer, but yeah, temper the big hopes and expectations you have against the pragmatic reality of how colleges operate.
Just throw on a last little point there, kind of echoing what Caitlin and Mike just said. Just for example, our campus, applied learning, huge, to the point where every department, that's something that they publicly share numbers about. It's like a metric that we measure by. That's like how a lot of departments define success is how many hours are you getting for applied learning? How many positions are you creating? So for within the scope of esports, after having conversations with my admins and learning like, hey, that's a huge priority for us on our campus, you can then kind of use that to your advantage, right? And then I can turn around and say like, okay, if applied learning is so important, let me go and try to create a proposal to create some new student employment positions and whatnot, and take that in. And of course, they bite on it immediately because that's already what they wanted. But you have to have some of those conversations initially, in some cases, some frank conversations to be like, what is important? Like truly, as a provost, what do you want? Is it winning? Is it is it creating applied learning positions? Is it engaging with the community? It's just another different potential metric for an institution to measure their success by.
Yeah, find the buzzword. At my first institution, it was a co-curricular learning or something like that. And at my current institution, a couple of years ago, we started the Jury Fusion program, which is a unique academic thing. It's not the purpose of this meeting. But it was clearly important when I started to a wide variety of admins, and it was in that mission, vision, values, right? So like dig through the documents, look at all the public statements your university president or other leaders have made, and find the phrase that gets repeated. And this is my more cynical take on what Travis just said. Generally, those buzzwords have substance to them. It is a new incredible program or a focus that the university has. But yeah, when you're pitching to the board of trustees and they've had 10 meetings today, if you can very quickly and succinctly be like, esports will lead to more, insert buzzword here, they'll go, great, love it. And that'll I think simplify the process a little bit.
I think, and I guess segueing to student opportunities, and this also goes off of, I know we only have we have like 10 minutes. So, but this also depends on your mission, right? So if you have an academically oriented goal set, you may need to create new opportunities for students. So if you need butts in seats, well, social media managers, broadcasters, analysts, managers, I mean, you name it, like all of these things are just as important, frankly, sometimes even more so than your actual players. My AD said, I don't care if they're a caster or player, they count on your roster. Those are just as valuable people. Yes, like we cannot have a Overwatch roster of 5 to 6 casters. Like they're going to be bad, like unless they're really good at the game, but they're not going to be great, right? But the point is those support staff in your numbers, if you are a recruitment based school, maybe consider opening your recruitment and saying, we're looking for broadcasters. Are you a graphic designer? Do you like social media? Are you a content creator? Cool. Come join our team. Come be in our program. If you're academic, maybe things like offering practicums. We do a thing on campus where we have a senior design project. So they work with various stakeholders in the field. So we had Ford, we had NASA, Microsoft, and these students are working on these projects and they have actual deliverables. Point is we could have something like that for esports. There could be an esports project. Maybe they're looking at stats over the course of a year and giving a coaching report on, okay, here's what you need to improve on, and here's what maybe you need in your next recruitment class or something like that. I have an accounting student who's my intern who's going to be working on helping me predict the budget for next year and revenue generating reports. So some of those educational opportunities, depending on if those are really important to your university, may be what you need to do. Community service, community engagement opportunities, TOing, mentorship, local high schools, whatever. But you don't need to necessarily be creative because traditional sports teams are doing this too. Other fields are doing this too. Esports can just use it and latch onto it if you have the resources to do it.
just that's another thing that takes time as well. Some of the like a GA position or a student worker position, we like just started getting some of that information to do that for next year, right? So if you want that, get on it early and start writing up the paperwork and gathering up your data to justify it, and then be patient.
And I guess the last thing we all kind of touched on is your goals may be different than your admins. I mean, I would tell you, if you go to a school and you apply for a director position and you don't like what they value, I wouldn't work there. I work at Michigan Tech. I mean, we're all underpaid here. Everyone knows that. I'm not going to beat that dead horse. It's already been dead for 45 years. And it's, you know, the whatever the weird mechanics are in Dark Souls when the body's just like going with your character when you're taking it around. But I am at Michigan Tech because I love what it stands for, and I love what we do for our students, and I love my students. I will do anything in my power for my students. So that's just what it is. So that's what I value. And my goals align with the ones of the university and in my athletic department. So if there is a difference or a misunderstanding, you cannot proceed unless you clear that up. You have to be on the same page. If your goals are different, but you have different ways of going about that and you can please both, do it. But you have to be on the same page, because the last thing you need is going in your boss and they say, okay, cool. Did you meet your 20 recruitment goal? And you're like, what?
But we beat Mizzou in a Rocket League match. So don't care. Did you hit your goal? Yeah. Yeah. I echo that sentiment. If you're in that interview and your goals aren't aligned, just think very carefully about whether you want to take that job or not. We covered a lot here today, folks. Any questions, any things that we didn't touch upon or that you want more clarification on or follow up? How do I do this at my university? Any questions, thoughts, concerns whatsoever? We got another minute or two. If there's anyone that even just a thought, I'll piggyback off anything we said. Yeah.
Question. So you mentioned metrics in terms of like you have a caster or someone social media manager, and they count, right? Strategies for bringing in a social media manager in terms that they are not allowed to come in as a metric. So basically being told you cannot scholarship a student for an admin position, i.e. social media manager.
Can you pay them in another way? Can you get them school credit? Do they have it in their intended program that they could receive a co-op or a practicum credit?
Do they have to start on your team to get a scholarship? Are you the ultimate arbiter of who gets a scholarship for what? So I'm going to have you mostly cast games, but you play Overwatch, right? Cool. You're a sub on my Overwatch team.
Congratulations.
You're just not going to start probably because we got 7 players that are better than you. I don't know. That's how I would do it personally. And it doesn't seem duplicitous because they probably do play that game. They're just not great. He says that's exactly what I'm doing. Cool. And that's something I tell to my admins all the time, where it's like, hey, we might be the only sport on campus that like actively recruits people who are both brand new to the sport they play and who are like better at the sport they play than any of your athletes, right? Like some of our guys in League of Legends are probably our best athletes on campus relative to the rest of the like competitive field in their title, right? So yeah, sometimes it's just getting the admins to understand. And also, like, you can go watch a basketball game, but you can't watch a CSGO match unless we stream it. So we have to have it. Maybe that's a good argument to make as well. But any other last minute questions? We got to wrap up here because we got the legislative session, but I want to make sure that we got everyone had a chance to be heard. Any questions? Awesome. Thank you guys. Appreciate your time.
You know what's funny about that is that Miles' reply to that tweet saying that it was doing numbers showed up in my timeline, but not me. Oh, really? I don't know why. I just liked it. I didn't even see what it was about.